1. The skeletal system.
Now that you've learned a few basic anatomical terms, you're prepared to boldly explore one of the most important bodily systems, the durable, yet unexpectedly sensitive, skeletal system.
The skeletal system is a vast and a complex system that is home to more than 206 bones as well as cartilage. Cartilage is the bendable stuff found at the end of your nose, among other places. This bone and cartilage combo makes up 20% of the total mass of the human body.
The skeletal system is designed to protect and support. That's its job, and it does it well.
The skeletal system as a whole can be broken down into two major divisions, the axial division and the appendicular division. The first part we'll look at is the axial division.
Section A, the mighty axial skeleton.
And now, an amusing fact from everybody's favorite anatomical educator, Slim Goodbody.
Did you know that the word skeleton comes from a Greek word meaning dried up body? Dried up bodies are fun!
The axial skeleton is composed of 80 bones and forms the long axis of the body that we mentioned before. This includes three major regions: the skull, the vertebral column, and the bony thorax.
Now, the axial division has an important job, namely supporting the head, neck, and torso, as well as protecting the brain, spinal cord, heart, and lungs. Without it, we'd be a gelatinous lump, unable to protect ourselves.
All right, maybe that's not true, but I'll tell you what is true. The skull is the most complex part of the axial skeleton, and also what we're looking at first. But before we do, it's probably a good idea for you to learn a few anatomical terms to help you understand the descriptions of bones in the axial skeleton. Two important terms to know are the terms paired and articulates.
The term paired usually means that a bone is paired with a copy of itself. In poker, you can have a pair of aces. In the skeletal system, you can have a pair of bones. For example, the temporal bones, two bones that help make up the sides of your skull, are paired bones. Obviously, the opposite of paired is unpaired. That's a bone that doesn't have a match.
The phrase articulates with is another way of saying connects with. So, for example, the radius and the ulna are two bones in your forearm that we'll talk about later. Both of these bones are connected to the humerus, a bone in your arm. So both the radius and the ulna articulate with the humerus.
So, if one bone articulates with another bone, it's connected to it. Got it?
Ask me in an hour.
Will do. Let's move on to the skull.
Region 1, the skull.
The skull is made up of 22 different bones, not including the 3 tiny bones in each ear. The bones of the skull are divided into 2 sets, the cranial bones, or the bones of the cranium, and the facial bones.
The bones in the cranium.
The cranium is unbelievably important because it protects the ears and the brain like a bony helmet. It also serves as a point of attachment for muscles in the head that we'll discuss later.
The cranium contains 8 bones. 2 of them are paired and 4 of them unpaired. The 2 paired bones are the parietal and the temporal. That's 4 bones total. The 4 swing-in single bones are the frontal bone, the occipital bone, the ethmoid bone, and the sphenoid bone.
Altogether, that's 8 bones, and yes, you have to know them all. Thus, the memorization begins.
The frontal bone is the bone that forms the forehead and part of the eye sockets, or as smart people say, the superior orbits. The frontal bone also contains the paranasal sinuses, the mucus-lined cavities that warm up and filter air as we breathe it. If you're confused, don't worry. We'll give you more detail on the sinuses a little later on.
The paired parietal bones form the upper sides, or simply put, the roof of your cranium. The occipital bone forms the posterior base of the skull, at the back of your head. And let's not forget the paired temporal bones. These bones form the inferior lateral sides of the skull at your temples, just over your ears and below the parietal bones. Remember, inferior means lower, and lateral means outer side of. So the temporal form the lower, outer side of your cranium.
There are also 2 bones found at the anterior base of the cranium. These are the ethmoid bone and the sphenoid bone. The ethmoid bone helps form the nasal cavity and the nasal septum, a wall that separates the cavity into right and left sides.
Don't worry,
We'll go into more detail on the nasal cavity in a little bit.
The sphenoid bone is located at the anterior or front part of the cranium's base. The sphenoid bone articulates or connects with all other cranial bones. Because of this, the sphenoid bone is sometimes called the keystone of the cranium.
One way to help remember the names of these bones is by breaking them up into ols and oids. The oid bones, ethmoid and sphenoid, are internal bones of the cranium. The ol bones, frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, are all external cranial bones. Get it?
Yeah, time for nakedness. Woo!
Sorry, nakedness will have to wait until we finish talking about facial bones.
There are 14 beautiful, beautiful facial bones. 6 of them are paired and 2 of them are unpaired, for a grand total of 14 facial bones.
The facial bones are the unpaired mandible, the paired maxillae, the paired zygomatic bones, the paired nasal bones, the paired lacrimal bones, the paired palatine bones, the paired inferior nasal conchae, and the unpaired vomer.
These wonderful bones are directly connected to the facial muscles, which we'll talk about later. Those fantabulous facial bones also provide cavities for the facial organs, like the eyes, nose, and tongue. But it doesn't stop there. The facial bones also anchor the teeth and even serve as pathways for air and food.
One of the most important facial bones is the mandible. The mandible forms the lower jaw and anchors the bottom teeth. It's the largest and strongest of all the facial bones.
Now, it's true the mandible is strong and works well for George Clooney and Jay Leno, but the paired maxillae are important facial bones.
The paired maxillae anchor the upper teeth and form the upper jaw. They also form the anterior or front part of the hard palate. In everyday life, the hard palate is known as the roof of the mouth, but it doesn't stop there. The paired maxillae also form the inferior orbits. That's the lower part of the eye sockets. They even help form the nasal cavity.
Other important facial bones are the paired zygomatic bones. These bones are the ones that form the cheekbones. Then there's the paired nasal bones. Without these babies, there'd be no bridge to your nose. And let's not forget the paired lacrimal bones. The lacrimal bones form the anterior medial orbits, which are part of the eye socket and, sadly enough, contain the lacrimal, or tear sacs. Another important pair of facial bones are the palatine bones. You remember earlier when we said that the paired maxilla make up the hard palate? Well, they don't do it alone.
The paired palatine bones make up the posterior hard palate. That's the back part of the palate. The paired palatine bones also make up a small part of the floor of the orbits, or eye sockets. And finally, they help make up our friend the nasal cavity. That's inside your nose in case you've forgotten.
And then there's the unpaired vomer, yet another important facial bone.
The vomer forms the posterior and inferior parts of the nasal septum. That's the back lower part of the little wall that divides the inside of your nose.
Finally, there's the paired inferior or lower nasal conchae. The paired nasal conchae make up the lateral or side walls of the nasal cavities. You got it? Now might be a good time to rewind the tape and review what you've just learned.
Oh, right, the hyoid bone. There's also a hyoid bone, which isn't officially part of the skull, but is often discussed at the same time.
The hyoid bone is a small horseshoe-shaped bone. It's located inferior to, or below, the mandible, and it's superior to the larynx, or voice box, in the anterior neck. Whew, that was a mouthful. The hyoid bone serves as a point of attachment for a bunch of neck and tongue muscles. It also acts as a movable base for the tongue.
The hyoid bone is a unique, almost sad bone. It's the only bone that doesn't connect directly with any other bone in the body.
Read